Alright, this is probably the third attempt I've made at re-uploading this video. I've had enough of the copyright system at this point, so I'm just gonna turn it into a glorified audio drama. Enjoy! Masamune-kun's Revenge is an anime I was interested in watching due to the plot of the manga sounding very interesting to me a year or so earlier when I was told about it. So when the anime was announced, I decided to hold off on picking up the manga until then. And was Masamune-kun's Revenge as good as it sounded? Masamune-kun's Revenge is about a boy named Masamune Makabe. When Masamune was a child, he was fat, and he was also in love with a beautiful rich girl named Aki Adagaki. Masamune was rejected, asking his childhood crush out, and given in return the name Pig's Foot. After that, Masamune grew to hate Aki, so he took it upon himself to exact the perfect revenge. Now to present day, where Masamune is no longer fat, but a handsome and fit young gentleman who the girls can't resist. Masamune is to attend the same school as the now older Aki Adagaki, and with his completely altered image from since they last spoke, Masamune's mission is to make Aki Adagaki fall in love with him, and once the moment arrives that she should ask him out, Masamune will firmly deny her affection and leave her to rot in the stench of sweet revenge. I think the most appealing part of the plot is how elaborate and bizarre Masamune's revenge is, and because of that, shows how truly dedicated he is. I think Masamune-kun's Revenge has a very strong and relatable story. Well, no one's ever going to be in his specific circumstances being able to exact revenge in that fashion, but in the way that Masamune was hurt in his past due to someone he had feelings for doing something unforgivable to him. It's something a lot of people can relate to, and that's what makes Masamune-kun's Revenge so appealing. The fact that there is a character who has an opportunity to get the ultimate revenge. A revenge many people probably would have liked to dish out themselves, but not fortunate enough to have the opportunity or not wanting to get involved with something like that themselves. So in a way, Masamune-kun serves as a way to release your aggressions, knowing someone feels the same way, and that they can accomplish what you couldn't. Masamune-kun really hits themes of being superficial, and the unfair treatment of people based on looks. It does a really good job of that, because now the ball is in the court of a former fat kid, and he monologues to himself about instances where if he wasn't attractive, he'd be in a bad situation. One of the problems with this show is how his goal, when you think about it, is pretty unsatisfying in some ways, like how in episode 6 at the beginning when Masamune is going over the end of his revenge plot, it just feels like, oh, well, now what? If it played out like that, it would feel rather anticlimactic, but chances are that's not going to end up happening anyway because the opening hints at what the actual plot progression is going to lead towards. At the end segment of the opening, you see Masamune as he leans in towards the seemingly asleep Aki for a kiss. I don't know how else this can be interpreted besides that the plot is actually going to lead into Masamune falling in love with Aki throughout his revenge plot. At the start, it kind of threw me off and made me a bit irritated that it would go through that much work to set the stage of an ultimate revenge, but then contradict itself. But as the show went on, it started to settle and I understood why it actually makes sense and works with the situation. The plot of Masamune-kun's Revenge makes the rom-com genre more fresh for people who have seen plenty of rom-coms. It's not necessarily about a guy and a girl who have misunderstandings, then work it out. It's an elaborate revenge plot that engages you, and that's another part of why it's so appealing. Strong and relatable story. It's no surprise to me that this is one of the more popular anime of the season. Masamune's character in particular feels like his sense of passion is genuine. He is so determined about getting revenge, and it's because of that the series feels like it's got a sense of progression. When Masamune sees others in his previous situation, or puts them in that kind of situation, he'll do what he can to make their lives less miserable, and help them come to terms with their issues. Like that guy who cut him, yet he blew it off and treated him normally afterwards. It shows his sense of empathy he gained from experience with Aki. A problem I had with Masamune was how sometimes he would make seemingly reckless moves that I would think would compromise his revenge plan, like straight up saying his feelings for Aki, and not only that, he's flaunting, "You're the one I like," or something like a complete douche. When I think of a popular guy going up to a popular girl and saying he likes her, that just screams superficial to me. But you know what? Aki even called him out on that. If she didn't tell him that specifically, then I'd think it was kind of stupid. But because she mentioned that, it isn't stupid. It just means Masamune screwed up his attempt at progression. The thing about Masamune that is unrelatable, of course, is being in insanely good shape. popular girls fawning all over him and all that. And because of that, I'm unsure how to feel about the approaches he was always taking. If I screwed up one attempt or told Aki my feelings, with being turned down essentially, then I'd think it's game over. But because Masamune has a degree of cockiness built into his ego, it's possible that is something someone like him would do, going back for more after being told he couldn't have any. I still don't really know what to think of that, but I'll leave it up to you to decide that part. Anyway, Masamune throughout the series learns some new things about being popular and superficial, and he grows a subconscious jealousy and feelings towards Aki again, which may play into him still having these lingering feelings he can't get rid of. His flashbacks show the important parts about his past, like being bullied and his denial from Aki. It just would have been better if we could have learned a bit more about Aki and Masamune when they were friends, I suppose? The one big problem I now realize with Masamune is how I don't know what his motivations outside of getting revenge is. From what I can tell, all he is doing is working out and staying healthy in order to get revenge. I mean, maybe he likes manga since he read his sister's manga, but that was for research in order to get revenge. Aki is in the same boat. She is rich though, so perhaps the reasons would be that she has so little exposure to the outside world, its entertainment and ambitions, that she wouldn't really have a clue about it. And because she's rich, she has no need to desire getting a dream job or such. Masamune is from a rich family as well, apparently, but I don't think that reasoning would apply to him the same way because his family acts rather normal compared to Aki's, having a fountain in the yard with a team of maids. It's unclear if Masamune has anything to look forward to, but I'll hold on to the possibility that finding a real love afterwards could be one of the motivations. But in any case, Masamune does a decent job for the position he's in, though he does make decisions I wouldn't have made. That does add variety and unpredictability to his character, and sometimes the results end up surprising me. I don't think I'd say I particularly like Masamune as a character, but his qualities work well with the show, and I don't dislike him as a protagonist either. Aki has an odd role to play in the show, because she is supposed to be someone you hate, but according to the ending segment from the opening, she is supposed to be the main love interest and girl we get the most invested in, and she pleasantly fills her role surprisingly well. She's hateable but likable at the same time. You get that she is unnecessarily cruel to people and has a bit of a rotten tsundere personality, but she's also an inexperienced rich girl who's unfamiliar with how to deal with some people, as well as with the commoner world. And when you see her flustered for making a mistake or interpreting something in a dumb way, it makes her feel somewhat endearing at the same time. But it leaves the question, how come you like her but want her to get destroyed by Masamune's plot at the same time? It's almost counterintuitive to what the story demands, so why bother making us like Aki? Well, there's a reason Aki did all the things she did, as well as for her general behavior, and it's something that can justify her being a tsundere and being a rotten person. Mind you, if you do end up hating Aki more, for one reason or another, all that does is make her that much more effective for the story, and to make that revenge much more desirable. Being able to go through the emotions of hating her then loving her, in both the viewers and Masamune's case, is what makes her character have a stronger impact. It's also because of the predetermined expectation to hate her that makes you surprised and more attached to her. I think Aki is great for the role she is supposed to fill, as well as the heroine that is pretty justified. Even though I typically hate tsunderes, if a tsundere is explained about why they behave the way they do, then it makes that much of a difference that I could like them. Aki's development isn't too considerable from looking into her past. We don't get that many flashbacks, and those we do get are usually brief and vague, but the lack of looking into her past and vagueness is intentional because otherwise we would know both sides to the story of Aki and Masamune. She does have some fairly decent development during the show in the present though. She goes from an unbreakable ice queen to someone who has a few vulnerabilities, quirks, and some issues of her own. Kojiro is the girly guy of the show, allegedly. Though from the first episode I was convinced he was a reverse trap. But he has his own feelings for a girl, so unless Kojiro is a secret lesbian, he's probably a guy. But anyway, if Kojiro was female, he'd be best girl hands down. He's really sweet, genuine, but naive. I think the contrast of Aki treating Masamune poorly is what made Kojiro that much nicer to have around. Even if his character isn't too deep, Kojiro would just make you think, why couldn't Aki just be nice like you? Having someone like Kojiro acting that respectfully to Masamune is pretty much what the show makes you desire after Masamune being Respect deprived, pretty much. I think Kojiro developing his own feelings was somewhat unexpected to me because I assumed he would be a super one-dimensional side character, but he's branching out instead. And that adds to his other motivation he gained, which was proving how manly he is. Sure, he isn't reinventing the wheel with his character, but I think Kojiro is a nice touch to the show. Yoshino is kind of an interesting character. Initially I didn't think much of her, and pretty much expected her to fade out of the picture later on, but instead she just pops up and takes center stage almost. This unexpected change made her character more appealing to me, and her motives are kind of unexpected as well. She wants to help Masamune get his revenge, and I was assuming it's because Aki was treating her poorly, so she wanted payback. It is because she was being treated poorly, but not for vengeance. It's to teach Aki a lesson and to improve how she behaves, so that Aki won't have such a rotten personality and such. Yoshino, I feel, acted more as a business partner throughout the show rather than an individual, if that makes sense. I felt like her existence was focused on assisting Aki with everything, or assisting Masamune with the revenge scheme. The extent we get is her being pissed off at Masamune when he screws up something, but we don't get much deviation from that or her blank emotionless expression she has 95% of the time. Yoshino is a character we learned very little about. I think there may or may not have been a flashback or two, but I think those were just when she was staring out the window to see Masamune and other minor stuff. And as mentioned, with her being more of a business partner, that kind of implies that she doesn't have much to develop in the present either. The most we got was how she asked for Masamune's number when they messaged and called. At that moment I was thinking it was being approached as if she was going to become one of the main heroines, and I liked that part, but they pretty much cut it off there. They don't have any other moments like that make you think, maybe Yoshino is best girl? Yoshino isn't that impressive of a character, but she does what she is meant to do. That's all she does for the most part though. Neko, when she was first introduced, was a bit confusing and it added a bit of distraction to the plot. Neko being a girl Masamune actually liked near when she came in made you think, why doesn't Masamune just date Neko and move on? Because essentially the revenge plot is what held him back from Neko, apart from his specific reasoning later on, but still. They could have turned the anime into a direction of not getting your revenge because that's not the right thing to do, and finding something to move on to get past it. That would be a pretty decent way to go about it, but Masamune's revenge can't be stopped so easily. And even if that were to happen, Neko comes in way too late for that to be an option I'd be happy with. The fact Neko had this supplement habit thing was a bit refreshing, since it's so specifically unique to her from what I can tell in terms of anime characters. Her motivation that you learn later on actually took me by surprise. I initially kind of hated her because of the interference and the confusion. The show intends for you to feel fishy about her feelings and everything. And because of that, I was kind of on edge when she was interacting with Masamune. But her motivation was shockingly sad. I was thinking even if Masamune decided to date her, that neither party would win. I won't spoil, but I think Neko's motivations were selfish, but justified to an extent. If Neko was anticipating Masamune's response the entire time, then that's actually a clever way she did it, but otherwise super selfish. I don't think her overall weight to the story and entertainment value is huge, but like some of the other characters, as I mentioned, she's just that little nice touch to the story to have that much more of an impact to the characters that you experience. And she's a touch because the story could easily go on without her ever existing. It just removes some jealousy from Aki and delays the overall progress. The background art is pretty good. There's usually a good sense of shading and light sources used, and there's a degree of detail to it. I have some slight issues with the character art. The heads sometimes look like they're kinda weird when in the glamour shots. Otherwise it's pretty standard quality for modern anime, but I mean that in a good way because that means there's no issues generally. Aki's character design is pretty recognizable from her hairstyle and color, but at the same time I have some sort of deja vu that I've seen her exact character somewhere else before. Masamune isn't very special in terms of character design, but the uniform is enough to make it feel unique to the show. The animation is mind-blowing, but it's another case of because it doesn't need to be. It's a school-based rom-com, so there's no real action sequences, so there's no real demand for pretty animation. It does its job completely fine, so nothing to really be concerned for unless you're disappointed you can't have a super high-budget rom-com. The soundtrack has some tracks that are enhancing for when, say, Masamune's determination is at its peak, and there's tracks that are pleasantries for things like when Aki is having tea and stuff. Not bad at all. Masamune is voiced by Josh Greeley. He has continued to perform excellently. With all the appropriate emotions and expressions that he does, he's pretty funny when the moment calls for it. I also feel like the Japanese voice was more full of himself and douchey sounding. Where Josh Greeley, during those moments where he's trying to be irresistible, he seemed more friendly. Aki's voice has a sense of intimidation to it when she speaks, and being lowishly expressed in pitch, I think it helps if anything, whereas the usual sub-watchers are probably not happy about it. Kojiro I think is better in the dub because he is literally voiced by a female in the Japanese, but by a male in the dub. Yeah, sure, he's supposed to give off a girly vibe, but a guy in high school of that stature isn't going to have a literal female voice. And I find it actually pretty funny in the dub because of how Justin Briner, I don't know, is voicing so highly pitched, and it feels like there's a bit of self-awareness to his acting. Yoshino's voice, I'd have rathered someone who isn't Monica Real, but she still does an excellent job with Yoshino's high and soft voice. There's not really much else to say about her. Neko is voiced by a Funimation newbie to my knowledge, and my god is she good. Sublius I doubt can deny it either. She has a high enough voice that flows really smoothly and naturally with her character. It's so nice. So overall pretty good dubbing, I'd say. The opening is pretty lazy for the most part. They have some minimal motion for the first section, but the context of everything is just jumbled. They'll have clips of things without any type of order or consistency. The only thing that is good about it is how it has some subtle signs of the themes in the show, but otherwise it doesn't convey what the show is about that well really. It's kind of an unorganized mess almost. The animation itself is acceptable though, but it's not that much better than the anime, where the animation is usually significantly better in the openings for other anime. The song itself is a bit of a saving grace since it's actually pretty decent and has some memorability to it, but it's not that great an opening in general. The ending is pretty straightforward with some text, a slideshow of the characters, then transitioning to some part with some bubbles floating up until it ends. Nothing impressive really, but people might be into the song. So Masamune-kun's Revenge I think relatively lives up to the expectations I had for it. My enjoyment for it was probably one of the highest of the season, considering I made sure to keep up with it when I didn't with others. The beginning was a bit weird for me, because the giant setup of the one dude in the courtyard asking out Aki was very deliberate feeling. It didn't seem that believable. I know it's anime, but it just seems too perfect for what the show wanted. A harsh introductory to Aki, but the thing that was most irritating about that is how she was doing the exact same thing she did to Masamune even years later. It's as if her character was built around the fact that she denies people all dramatically and staged looking almost. It's also a bit ridiculous that all those guys would ask her out if they know her reputation. Not to mention they would pretty much all 100% like her for looks. But anyway, thankfully that had little prominence later on. Once the alliance between Yoshino and Masamune was established, it made me feel like stuff was really going to happen, like the revenge scheme was gonna actually work. It was kind of exciting, because I'm sure you were all pumped at the idea of Masamune destroying Aki. Like I said earlier though, Masamune approached things a bit less than ideally, and that took away from the show a bit. But surprisingly, for every little mistake Masamune made in my eyes, it was usually made up for with some unexpected development in the plot. So I'm not sure if I should applaud or hate it for betraying my expectations. It at least makes the show more interesting if nothing. Masamune-kun's Revenge I think people like so much because once again, it's relatability. It further explores the themes of hypocrisy later on that people will really understand, and it will drive them to root for Masamune even further. The hypocrisy later is really a strong point in the plot, because it's centered around Aki liking someone for the same things Masamune was originally criticized for. Aki is the entire reason for Masamune busting his hump and improving his physique, but to learn this would almost render the basis for his revenge plot and self-improvement useless. It begs the question, why didn't it work out back then? And it's because of that it intrigues you. The thought of there being an actual justification behind Aki's actions back then and now makes the anime so much better. Because if you were to learn there was a misunderstanding of sorts, then it could turn your hate for Aki into love. If you learn Aki's rotten personality is because of something aside from her being a cold-hearted witch, then that gives the plot more weight. The other thing that occurs because of the hypocrisy is the themes of being superficial hits once again. But this time it's because Masamune looks so attractive and ideal, that he is not a person of interest potentially again. So that second perspective of being superficial is really beaten into your head by then. It's super effective. Masamune-kun's Revenge has a few cliches to it, but it usually puts a bit of a spin on the end of the cliches that you might not expect. Because of that, it doesn't blend in with every other rom-com. And it's kind of satisfying when the results are different to what you anticipated. And that's probably what the show does best, is betraying everything you expected. Not in a spectacularly groundbreaking way, but enough for you to appreciate it being different than the norm. A problem with Masamune-kun's Revenge would probably be the same problems a love triangle has. There's two very different and very certainly happening paths. If it takes one you don't like, then it could ruin the whole experience for you. And my guess is if you wholeheartedly want Masamune to exact his revenge without changing your mind, then you're probably going to end up disappointed with the entire series. It will be painful, and every step towards Masamune developing a relationship with Aki will just piss you off. It'll be like Toradora was for me, because I was unaware that it was meant to be a show about two people helping each other pursue their crushes to fall in love with each other in the process. I didn't know that was the narrative of the show, so I was crushed by the results in my ignorance. And I can easily see people missing the narrative from Masamune-kun's revenge. If people skip the openings, chances are they'll miss the memo that Masamune is supposed to fall in love with Aki. And before you say, it's possible that doesn't happen, yes, it's possible, but no anime on earth have I seen being so misleading that they would make a protagonist hinted at kissing in the opening someone who wasn't the main or intended interest. But anyway, in a way it both works if you love or hate Aki, but the day a decision is made if Masamune chooses Aki or not is the day when liking or hating Aki pretty much decides if you like the anime or not. As expected, the end of Masamune-kun's revenge doesn't conclude or wrap up the story. The manga exceeds the anime in content, obviously, so unless they made some original anime ending to compensate for it, then the story was never going to be finished. Masamune doesn't get his revenge yet, and Aki doesn't date Masamune in the end either, but in the end Aki is a bit of a nicer person, so there's some progression in her character we get out of it. So it kind of goes without saying that Masamune-kun's revenge needs another season or so, and there's a lot of people who would hate that fact, as well as hating it even more since the series is based on the revenge that you'd want to know the results of. I think standing on its own, it's not a bad ride at all though. Most of the entertainment in Masamune-kun's revenge is centered around the characters, whether that be their development and interactions or just the flair of their personalities. And luckily alongside the characters is an engaging story to complement it. It does have some weaknesses though, like how the plot might sound better on paper than in actuality, and how the progression might feel a bit interrupted by some small roadblocks. Overall, if you want an anime with a strong and relatable story, characters worth sticking around for, targeting good themes that are executed well, a rom-com that sticks out from others, and you understand the narrative properly, which you should now if you didn't, and like it, then Masamune-kun's revenge you might like. But if you want a more sweet and straightforward romance, some more thoroughly developed characters, rom-coms aren't your thing, if you dislike the love interest, or the plot doesn't seem satisfying or interesting, then Masamune-kun's revenge probably isn't the anime for you. Links to watch Masamune-kun's revenge will be in the description below. So do you find the story of Masamune-kun's revenge relatable? Is Aki potentially worth redeeming, or just rotten to the core? Is Kojiro best girl? If you like this video and want to see more reviews like it, check out my other reviews. And if you want to see my latest videos as they are released, then feel free to subscribe.